Alright, let's do a little comparison. Shift fork, new versus old. So here's a throwout bearing. It just kind of sits in here. And that pivot, there's a little spring, retainer spring, and pop that out. Okay, so the pivot actually, from this side, the two dimples, I don't know how you're going to compare that. But you can see the one on the left is not quite as protruding as the one on the right. And in here, it obviously, there's so much pressure on the pivot and it wasn't lubed very well. It's all dirty and dry. I think the pivot would have eventually eaten right through the shift fork or the rod here, and then boom, it would have come straight out and then no clutch action. So definitely worth changing this part. Good thing we got a new one. The little retainer spring will transfer right over. It's pretty easy. And the throwout bearing, so this part, it slides on the housing of the input shaft. So this touches the actual pressure plate, this part. So that's spinning with the engine. However, this part stays fixed to the fork. Alright, so the fork transfers pressure through the bearing on that pressure plate. The problem here was it wasn't sliding very well because, again, mud, dirt, no lubrication. So again, that force was excessive, causing that and everything else. You can see the shaft here it's clean where it was sliding, but the old grease basically got caked on there. This is all like clay. So we'll have to clean this off. We'll WD-40, compressed air, whatever it takes. But you can see this thing was basically underwater in a mud hole. Yep. And once we get the clutch disc off, we'll see what that looks like, how worn that is, and basically throw some parts at it, slap it back together. Alright, let's take off this pressure plate. Got my little magnet tray ready, and let's go to town. The 20 volt doesn't even feel these little bolts. Come on, where are you? Sway bar's a little in the way. So we got one left here. That guy's out. That guy's out. We don't want this thing to fall on my face. Steady. Alright, so should get a little pry bar here. coming off the dowels. Easy does it. Did I forget a bolt? It has happened before. It's coming, it's coming. Sweet. Okay. Very good. Balancing act. Oh yeah. Sweet. What do we got here? A nice flywheel. Doesn't look burned or anything. And our original bearing actually feels very good. Still lubricated. I'm not going to touch the pilot bearing in this case, even though some people might say replace it. It says Japan, and I trust Japan more than China in this case. Now let's inspect. Yeah, it's toast. You can see there's no more little grooves left. Oh man. That was an ASIN unit. This is ASIN. So good job to ASIN. This must be the OEM clutch. Pressure plate. Doesn't look terrible. 52D. Whatever it says 020405. Was it replaced at some point? It says ASIN on it. So I'm not sure if this was replaced in 2005. I mean, that would be only 3 years after the car started its life. Or it could be the original. So there it is, and we'll be back with installation. Alright, you know that good feeling when in a long project or repair you reach the point where you've disassembled everything, took off the old worn parts, and it's time to clean up and install the new parts and reassemble everything. It's a good feeling. So first thing we're going to do is clean up the area where the throwout bearing rides. So basically this whole area here. Now again, I'm using WD-40, not brake clean, because well, it doesn't smell bad. It's not toxic. It works pretty well. Much better. Sweet. You see, that's why the input shaft needs the pilot bearing, because as some play, it's normal, but the bearing is supported here at the flywheel to eliminate that play. Looks good. So now we can install our throwout bearing and the shift fork and put a little lube on this pivot ball to slow down any further wear. Alright, so throwout bearing goes this way, and it's already greased inside, so we'll just install it that way. Now, is there a direction? It looks symmetrical to me, so we're just going to stick it on. Excellent. Slides very nicely. And then the new shift fork. Where did I put my new shift fork? Here it is. So that's going to come in like so and go right into the throwout bearing. So we have to lube that spot, so we can just put some lube on the ball. Put some lube on the ball, yes. I don't have, the kit didn't come with any special lubricant, so we're going to use this purple stuff. Basically brake lube. And let's put some on the fingers where it's going to press on the throwout bearing. So right here and right here. Alright, so slip it in here. Slip it into the bearing. Now, that little spring should engage with the pivot. And that's it. So that's the action. Pressure plate's pushing back. Slave cylinder pushes on the fork. And that's how much travel it has. So that's done. Let's put on the new pressure plate and the actual disc. Alright, so here we have our flywheel. I cleaned up any dirt around the perimeter. And my favorite way to do this, since we have to put the actual disc and the pressure plate on, is to use this special tool, the alignment tool, put it right through, put it in the pilot bearing. Now again, this tool doesn't really, there's a lot of play, but if the tool was correct, this would not fall out. It would just stay there. However, since it's so loose, it kind of sucks. There's too much play in there. How do we get around that? Alright, well, here's the solution. I found a different tool that has a fatter end to it and that fits pretty well in our pilot bearing. Now, the splines weren't correct. It was a little too thin, so I wrapped some Gorilla Tape around it, and now it fits snugly into our clutch disc. This tool was like from an Audi clutch job, but you know, the name of the game is to get the disc perfectly centered along the pilot bearing so the input shaft can go right into the clutch disc, because if it's not centered, then you're never going to align the transmission. It's never going to mate. So if we try this, I'd say that's perfect. It's not going to go anywhere, and it's centered. That's what we want. Now, here's our pressure plate, and we just need to align the dowels and the threaded holes. It should go right on. Now, if I can only get under here with two hands. There's one dowel. There's two. Alright, looks pretty good. Let's get those little bolts started before this thing falls down. Like it. So you see there's a little play in there, so we'll just approximately center it and then buzz the bolts down. Last but not least, the one up here. Right around there. There goes my light. I don't know, maybe some people put Loctite on these bolts, but we'll just torque them to spec. Where's that bolt? Do by feel here. Sweet. I like it. We pull our tool out. And the new parts are mounted. Let's go ahead and torque these down. We'll be ready to mate the transmission back up. Alright, I looked up the torque specs. 16.5 foot-pounds. That's one. You could use a little pry bar to hold the crankshaft still. There we go. Put it in a tooth. Two. Three. Four. Five. Last but not least, this guy right here. Good enough. All right. Now, now we are ready to mount. I think everything's greased up, ready to go. Make sure you're not forgetting anything. I think you should be good.